6 easy ways to get more dynamic range in Lightroom. No HDR required.
No Vaseline.
What's up everybody, my name is Samar Ali Khan. Welcome to another cinematography tutorial. Today I'm going to show you guys how to take photographs like this and turn them into something like this. An easy and the most common way of doing this is by doing HDR photography. HDR stands for high dynamic range. On Google or on Wikipedia, it will give you some weird definition of what HDR actually is. But now I want you to use your common sense, because think about it. HDR stands for high dynamic range. High dynamic range meaning getting a higher dynamic range, making your photographs look more dynamic through the use of more brightness, more luminosity, and getting more vibrance. Now, no one's actually told me what HDR actually means, but that's something you can work out on your own. HDR photography is taking 3 different shots of the same subject with 3 different exposures. For instance, taking a landscape shot. So now I want you to think about your thirds, the top half, middle half, and the bottom half. The top half meaning the sky in terms of landscape photography. So what you would do is you take your first photograph where you would try and get as much information in the sky possible, and then you do the same thing for the other 2 photos as well. And then your camera would actually process all of those 3 images into one photograph for you. Or if your camera doesn't have the HDR photography feature in it, then you can do this in Lightroom, Photoshop, and Photomatix Pro. But like I said, I'm going to show you guys how to do this in Lightroom without the use of HDR photography. So let's get started. The first thing you want to do is open up Lightroom. So if you want to open up a new image, go up to File, Import Photo or Video to import your file, or you can take your photograph, the one that you really like, and drag it on top of the Lightroom icon, and it should open up the photo for you. Then go into the Develop tab, and this will allow you to start developing it. So let's say I go with this photograph. There are many different ways of getting more dynamic range in your shots, but I'm going to show you guys 6 easy ways to get more dynamic range in your shots. So next time you go outside to shoot photographs, if you're shooting landscape photography and if you want to get high dynamic range in your shots without, doing HDR photography, then I would recommend that you underexpose your photograph by 1 or 2 stops, or try and get the perfect exposure where you have enough information in the sky and in the foreground itself. Alright guys, so let's get started now. As you can see, this photograph right here, it's got good exposure, it's sharp, and there's a lot of information in it, but you can see that the sky looks a little bit blown out. And the reason for that is because I was shooting on a sunny and overcast sort of day. But you can see that there is some information in the sky, and the first way to check if you've got information in the sky is to use the exposure tab. So that's the first technique. So I'm going to go ahead and decrease the exposure a little bit. If you obviously take it all the way down, then that's just going to darken your whole image. But a good way to check if you got information in the sky is to bring the exposure down by quite a lot. So when you bring the exposure down and you realize that the white parts in your photo are starting to look a little bit grayish, that's an indication of the fact that there's no information there, because these parts are actually blown out and they're straight up highlights. You're not going to be able to get any information back. So I think that's where you start to realize that you shouldn't decrease your exposure anymore over here. The only reason I've decreased my exposure quite a lot is due to the fact that I want to see how much information I already have there, and then I'm going to do all the other steps, and then I can come back at the end and increase the exposure back a little bit. Alright guys, so now the next step is to bring down the highlights. I normally bring down the highlights all the way down, and then I can alter it a little bit to see what sort of information you get. So now you can see that there is some information there, and it's bringing back a bit of color, so it's not turning gray. And the fact that it's bringing back a little bit of color means that there is some information there. And now the next step is shadows. The thing about shadows is that it's going to open up some of the shadows in the darker parts. And now that we've actually decreased the exposure and we've decreased the highlights so much in this photograph, it looks much darker than it actually should. So what you're going to do is open up the shadows a little bit more. So now you can see it's brought back some of the information that you really wanted in the main subject and the foreground. And then you can obviously go ahead and, alter some of the other options such as blacks and the whites. I normally bring down the blacks to like 20 and the whites to about 10. Now the next technique is clarity. Clarity normally just sharpens your photographs and certain elements of your photograph. So you can go ahead and increase the clarity, but I wouldn't recommend you increasing it too much. I would say 10 to 20 or 50 at max, depending on how much information you really want in your photograph. And see that it's brought back a lot of the information, and it's made my foreground and my main subject being this deer right here, made it look much more brighter, and it's given it more dimension, meaning it's given it more high dynamic range, which is the whole purpose of this video. I normally use tone curves in my photographs to get a little bit more dynamic range, but what that normally does is if you move it up and down and see what really suits you well. So when you bring these bits down and up a little bit, you see you get a bit of that information back, and you can toggle the switch to see if your information is there or not and what sort of difference it's making. So now what I normally do is I normally bring this all the way down and tap over here so I can alter the ends, and then to create this sort of S curve. And to be honest, to this photograph I wouldn't really add too much. You don't actually have to use tone curves in your photograph, but you can. It's made a little bit of a difference, so see, it's got much more dynamic range back now. Okay, so now the next and the final step is luminance. So luminance is actually how much transparency and how much light and information your color has. So as we're using the HSL tab, HSL stands for hue, saturation and luminance, as you can see right here. I would say go and click on the color tab, and this will allow you to use all the colors at once. So in this photograph, my main subject is actually the deer itself and a bit of the foreground, meaning the grass. So let's say we go back up, because my photograph's too dark now, so I'll increase the exposure a little bit to see what's actually happening over here. There you go. So now, if you don't know which colors to edit first for the luminance, what you can do is you can click on HSL and use this dot button right here, and you can drag it around different parts of the photograph to see which ones you want to edit and which color is actually in that substance. So let's say around over here, you know, in the sky you have some blues. So let's say you go back to color and you go down to blue and you bring down the luminance of the blue. And now that's brought back so much more information by me bringing it down. Let's say I bring it down to 20. Actually, probably bring it back down to 40. Wait, sorry, minus 40. Alright, now you can see it gives it that sort of storm-like feel, as if there's going to be a storm and there's going to be heavy rain. So that's really good. You've got that sorted now. Now you want to make your subject stand out, because now that everything else behind the subject is darker, it kind of blends in all together, and that's not what you want. So what you can do is, you know, the deer is going to have the reds, oranges and the yellow, so work with this now. Let's say I bring up the luminance for the orange a little bit, and then you can double click the word luminance if you want to take it back to 0, and you can use Command Z to go back and Command Shift Z to come back. For example, doing redo. So let's say I do that to see the difference. So it does make a little bit of difference, and you can even change the saturation and the hue. So I want to make it a little bit red. Okay, bring up the luminance a little bit more. See what the saturation does. Bring up the saturation a little bit more, and now I'm going to look at reds. So let's say I increase the saturation a little bit, make it a little bit more red, and increase the luminance. Let's say I increase it all the way up and see what difference it makes. Not much, so let's make the grass a little bit darker now. I normally bring down the luminance for the grass completely and change the hue all the way to the opposite end. And now you can see the difference when you press the switch. So now you can see it's added much more dimension in terms of the green, so that's quite successful. It gives you that sort of space and gives you more shallow depth of field. And now that you've done that, now go back to the exposure and double click exposure to see what the difference is made. So that's what it would actually have looked like before, with all of the other settings without exposure. And if I press Command Z again, this is what my exposure is currently looking like. So now I'm going to go ahead and increase the exposure quite a bit. So that's okay. So now I'm going to use other tabs to get some of the information back. So let's say I bring back the blacks a little bit, bring them down to minus 20, close the shadows a little bit. And then once again, I can go back to the blues and bring down the luminance even more to get that information. Boost the saturation a little bit more. And now, depending on what overall look you want for your photograph, you can use the temperature. Okay, then I increase the vibrance, increase the saturation. And now I think that looks much better than what it was before. So if you want to see the before and the after, tap Y. And now you can see that the original compared to the new one. So now you can see that the after compared to the before has much more information and much more depth. Let's say I'll add a little bit more exposure, add a little bit more blacks, a bit more white, and there you go. And that's the end result. Now, for some reason, if you felt like you needed a little bit more information in the sky and you want the photographs to have a bit more dynamic range, I recommend using the graduate filter. So you click on the graduated filter, drag it down, you can bring down the exposure. So you can use all of the other techniques that you've actually used with this as well. So bring up the clarity a little bit, bring down the blacks, the whites, get more shadows. And now you can use the switch again to see how much of a difference it actually makes. And that's done. When you're done editing, double click and export, or you can go up to File and Export, and then go ahead and export your photograph. Alright guys, so if you like this video, then go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you dislike this video, then go ahead and give it a dislike. But let me know with a comment down below why you like this video or why you dislike this video. So guys, if you do like this tutorial, then go ahead and leave a comment down below of what you would like me to make a tutorial on next. And if you want to see more tutorials on Lightroom or Photoshop or just photography and making videography in general, then leave a comment down below of what you would like to see exactly next time. So guys, please subscribe to this channel and my other technology channel called The Electric Bulb. So guys, please tap the notification bell. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. So guys, thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.
Who's there?
If I could take you up in paradise, I suppose. If you would tell me